Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and I'm really excited about this guest we're having on today. Folks, so often with this channel, when I first started this channel, it was meant to be more of a secular, scholarly endeavor. That was the intent. But before I taped my very first episode, realized that the Spirit would also enter into the conversation as well. And I think this is a
Mhm.
perfect guest for this type of conversation because my guest here today is Dr. Michelle Weiner. Weiner? Weiner?
Either way.
Okay. Who earned her PhD in comparative theology through Euclid University, and she's a graduate of Lexington Theological Seminary. Now, this is what's so interesting. Michelle shares kind of a similar background. She was raised in an evangelical world, in particular the Southern Baptist Convention. For 3 years, she attended an IFB, Independent Fundamentalist Baptist school, which is its
Mhm.
own story in and of itself. And we
Yes.
wanted to touch on this stuff, but she has a similar background. But after getting her PhD, well versed in theology and history and biblical studies, um, she becomes a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And there's also she has a mystical encounter. So we're going to talk about all that today here on MBR. Michelle, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Mhm.
So I am excited because, of course, you sent me this book, Return to
Yes.
Mamry, and it's Recovering the Melchizedek Mysteries Beneath the Sacred Groves. And this is really, I have to say, I read this book last week. I talked to you about it afterwards. I took
Mhm.
copious amounts of notes. There's some really interesting, original stuff going on here that's
Yes.
truly unique. And I think this is a book that if you're a Latter-day Saint or if you're just a student of religion, and you're interested, this is a fascinating book. So I'm going to have a link in the description, and we're going to talk about this book because it really is a great book. I really enjoyed it. It's well read, well written, and so it's it was just an easy read, but it was also very packed with so much information. And we're just going to touch on it today, but I want to encourage people to check out the book. But before we start about talk about that, Michelle, I want you to tell us a little bit about your origin story because again, evangelical background, that at the age of 30,
Yes.
become a Latter-day Saint after all this theological training. It's quite an unusual and unique journey.
It's a very unique journey. And I struggle to make sense of it at times too, as you can imagine. So it was kind of a whirlwind journey. So I was raised Southern Baptist, and my grandfather was a Southern Baptist minister. And then I went to Christian school, a Presbyterian school for, well, I guess counting preschool, it was more like, um, you know, I'm not sure how many years it was, up until fifth grade. And then from there, my parents decided to, as you mentioned, um, to put me into an independent Baptist school for 3 years in junior high. Some of those most crucial years of your life when you're just trying to figure things out. And I felt like my world was just completely turned upside down from that experience. Um, and I didn't know which way was up. And then by the time, my parents decided to, and this was typical of, private, I like to say I'm a private school brat. But this is typical of those of us who went to private school in this area that when you finish eighth grade, you go to public school for the first time. And so I did go to public school and finished high school at a public school. So and then from there, I went to college. I decided to study religion because I was just so spiritually messed up at that point. And something else you didn't mention was that I did get involved with a charismatic group for a little while I was in
Oh,
college. Yeah, I didn't
okay, wait.
mention
Actually,
that.
and there's a
Yeah,
lot to unpack here. So first of all, I just want
there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot there. And so from there, but I was still, I was trying to figure things out because I was just so spiritually messed up. There's no other word for it.
So just
And
Michelle, I just want you to understand. So just to give you context
mhm.
here. So you attended a Presbyterian school till
Yes,
grade, which was then more of a Reformed Calvinist school. Then you go to
yes, it was a Calvinist.
and you have the IFB, which is a very literalistic, very
Yes.
conservative, very legalistic form of Baptists. And so you have that. And then you go to public school, and then you get involved in the charismatic renewal movement when you're in college. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of like a very similar journey. I think you and I have similar paths. So you're spiritually messed up a little bit from this. Explain why that was. Was there confusion? Were you just not sure? Did you have, I mean, just talk a little
Um,
bit about that.
I
What
think
made you go messy?
a lot of that confusion was fear-based
Ah,
um, because I had been presented with an idea of God and Jesus. Of course, in that belief system, they see God and Jesus as the same. So, when you pray to God, you pray to Jesus, you pray to God. It's understood the same. So, because of the Trinity. And so, I was taught to fear Jesus, to really fear Jesus and to fear the rapture and, to
and
fear the
Hellfire?
hell. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I just didn't, I just had trouble making sense of, well, what do I really believe and why? And so when I did study in the theological field, and there was an interesting kind of turn of events there because I studied at a very liberal theological seminary. And so from there, I was exposed to new ideas and new ways of seeing Jesus Christ and God and in some ways this experience in seminary was very formative. It was a Disciples of Christ school and they are restorationist in their theology. And so this was my
Yep,
first introduction to restorationism.
absolutely.
And from there, I began to realize, hey, my beliefs are going in an entirely different direction. But at the same time, I still needed that. I still approached the Bible, whether I wanted to admit it or not, as somewhat of a literalist.
Okay.
And
That's
I
your
think you
context.
can,
Now, I just want
yes,
to I want to interject a little bit here because
mhm,
you're saying a lot of things, and for a lot of Latter-day Saints, they're like, "What restoration? This doesn't make any sense." Well, just understood the Disciples of Christ movement comes out of the
mhm.
Stone Campbell
The
movement,
Campbell Stone movement.
and that was where Sidney Rigdon came out of. And there,
Hmm.
one of the original names that they went under, in addition to Disciples of Christ Christian Church, was also Church of Christ. So Christian
Church of
Church,
Christ.
Christ,
Yes.
this is all part of the restorationist movement that's going on that precedes the Mormon Restoration.
Hmm.
And the original name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was actually Church of
Church of
Christ.
Christ.
So it was in many ways birthed out of this movement. So here we have
Hmm.
Reform background, a conservative fundamentalist background, Southern Baptist mainline evangelical background. Now we're moving into a restorationist background, and then we're moving into more mainstream tradition,
Hmm.
Protestantism that's more mainline liberal. So
Yes.
you're the whole gamut. You've already
Yes.
experienced at a
Absolutely.
relatively young age and during your formative
Yes,
years.
yes, yeah. I'm probably, let's see, at this point, I'm in my early to mid 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I get this incredible opportunity to spend a year studying after I finish my seminary degree. I get this incredible opportunity to spend a year studying with the World Council of Churches in Switzerland. So that completes the journey. Well, it doesn't complete the journey, but that adds to it. So it's a very interesting mix. So yeah. Um, yes.
Love it. I absolutely love it because you did, like I said, I end up at the World Council of Churches, which growing up now, you understand, like
Oh
growing up in
yes.
the end
Yeah.
times world that we grew up in, that the Antichrist system is
Hmm.
about to be, where the rapture is about to happen, and that this one world religion would emerge. A lot of people thought it
Yes.
was the World Council of Churches that would be kind of the impetus for this one world religion that we would all have to belong to. And so you went from believing that in many ways a conspiratorial
Being taught
mindset
that even,
and
yes.
taught that.
In that school, the Independent Baptist school, they certainly taught that all of that was of the devil.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And
moving toward a
honestly,
one world religion.
one world religion that basically
Yeah.
the World Council of Churches would also make, and in many cases, they would maybe work hand in hand with the Catholic Church essentially to create this one world religion, and that they would persecute all the real Christians or true Christians
Yeah.
that refuse to participate in these churches. So this is kind of the mindset that we grew up in the world that we grew up in. So to find
Mhm.
yourself from going from that mindset to going to Switzerland and working at the World Council of Churches is really mind-boggling, considering how relatively short period of time this all happens as well. So your
Yes.
religious
Mhm.
evolution must have just been a bit like I mean, just on steroids or something, because this is
Yes, it certainly felt that way. And as I've looked back on it, I'm like, is this even like this is crazy? It's a crazy story, but it's all true. I have the degrees to prove it.
Okay, so I
Um,
wanted you to talk a little bit about, okay, so you decided to pursue an education in religion partly birthed out of fear and confusion, and you
mhm.
found yourself all the way, getting a PhD in comparative religion. And so at this point, how would you describe yourself academically, but also spiritually?
Well, this is interesting, and by the time I returned from studying in Switzerland, I felt like I wasn't able to find a job over there or anything. I thought, I was going to land, I thought God had great plans for me. And I was just going to kind of find my way, and I didn't. And I came back home, had to move back in with my parents. It was very humiliating. And I would say it was the most confusing time of my life. And by that point, I'd kind of lost my faith. And I think understandably so. I like to say I was going through a quarter life crisis at that point.
Okay, so you actually you have a faith
Mhm.
crisis, and so maybe talk a little bit about that because I think it's really important because in this space. We're having a
Mhm.
lot of people who have had faith crises, such as myself, are
Mhm.
currently going through a faith crisis. So I want you to talk a little bit about maybe what led to your faith crisis and just talk a little bit about that because I think that would resonate with a lot of people.
Well, I think it was the mixture of the literalism that I was raised with and the fear-based theology versus the liberal mindset that I encountered while in seminary, where there was no, whereas there were a lot of lofty ideals, and I mean, just great, what would you call it? Moral, kind of this, and even, we in ecumenical school, we would talk about the what's called the ecumenical imperative that Christ wants the church unified as, as a whole. So we would talk about these lofty ideals, but then I didn't see a lot of practical use in my own life, or and then I kind of struggled to make sense of the contradictions that I saw. Um, and so for me it was, well, I need something, I need a faith that's concrete, but at the same time incorporates the teachings of Christ in a way that's meaningful for me,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Okay, so you're going through this faith crisis, and at some point, did you actually completely lose faith in God?
I would say so.
And
Almost. Almost.
almost. Okay, so you were
Almost. Yeah,
okay, so
I didn't become an atheist,
okay.
but I think I became somewhat of an agnostic.
Okay. And so okay, agnostic and so then you go through this process. Now I want you to just tell us kind of lead us into maybe your spiritual renewal or and kind of talk a little bit about that because I think it's important for people to understand your very complex and very interesting faith journey.
Hmm. Well, I met my husband during that time, and my
Mhm.
husband is of the Jewish faith.
Okay.
So there's another, what would you call it? Another caveat, if you will. Um, and so, um, but even my husband is fairly liberal in his thinking too, because he was raised Reformed. And so, that kind of added some interesting, and I think I'm not quite sure how to explain that, but I've also had an interest in Jewish traditions and the Jewish faith, so I guess that was not a surprise that I would fall in love with him.
Well, I think that's great. And I think that's actually, I think I want to kind of maybe talk
Hmm.
about maybe the
Yeah.
experience that you had,
Yes.
both you and your husband had. And I want to
Yes.
key in on that painting behind you because I think it's really important to talk about that you guys had a mystical
We
experience
did. We did. We
on a
shared a
mountain.
mystical experience.
And I
Hmm.
want you to share part of that story with our audience. And of course, you can get more details when you get the book. But I want you to talk about how pivotal that was and really put you on the direction that you're on today.
Well, at the time we experienced this, I didn't see it for what it was. I didn't even realize fully what was happening. But my husband and I did share a mystical experience before we ever even got engaged.
Hmm.
And part of that story has to do, first of all, with something I haven't mentioned yet, is that my husband and I have a huge age difference. My husband is significantly older than me. And, at the time I was just fresh out of graduate school and trying to figure things out. I had been in relationships, but had never been married. My husband, it's a very different story, being older, and, you can kind of guess from there. Um, and so not understanding that the differences in thinking there, and being, I mean, I was pushing 30 at the time, I like to say. So I wanted to get married, and I knew my husband, or I felt that my husband was the one, but he had a lot of reservations, and for very good reasons. um so but I didn't understand that at that point. Um, so um, so one day we decided we were in the mountains of North Carolina, and we decided to we were just kind of touring the area at the time, and my husband had said something to me in passing about that, or he had hinted that he was thinking about breaking off the relationship. And I got very upset, and I just kind of walked off and sort of screamed at God. I didn't scream, but it was kind of like internal, like, I just was angry at God. I'm like, I mean, I felt like he was the one. Why is this not working out? Yeah, I just didn't understand the dynamics. And my husband and I decided, we were not married at the time, but we decided to go to this local waterfall that he had been to before. I had not realized he had been there, but there's a lot of waterfalls in the North Carolina mountains, and so we decided to stop at this waterfall area. And while we were there, three mysterious women appeared, and they were Hispanic women, and they appeared as Hispanic, and they proceeded to, one of them, they were three different ages, and one of them decided to pull my husband, the one that was closer to my husband's age, decided to pull him aside and talk to him. I sat there and talked to the lady that was closer to my own age. And then, there was a younger girl with them that was playing in the water, and there was not a lot of, I mean, she was just kind of on her own. Um, so, um, so we, so it, but I didn't, I wasn't privy to the conversation that my husband was having with the older lady. And she was probably at the time, my husband was in his 50s at the time, so she was probably around that age, I would guess. Um, but yeah, I was not privy to that conversation. But in the midst of that, she apparently told him that she reminded him that I had been sent to him by God, and that he needed to marry me. And again, I had no idea that this was even being talked about.
Okay. And keeping in
At this
mind
time.
that his intention was to break the relationship off,
Yes, it was.
and he has
Yeah.
this encounter, this mystical encounter, in which he's told that God sent you to him and vice
Yes.
versa. And
Mhm.
and and that and so that kind of, and again, this is a Reform Jew who maybe is not, it's just
Not super
interesting.
religious.
Yeah,
No.
that's not particularly religious and maybe not open to, or not necessarily, I mean, open to even the idea of having a mystical experience, but yet this person seemed to know a lot about what was going on, the situation, and gave him guidance that changed the
Mhm.
trajectory of both your lives.
Oh, yes, definitely. And so a month later, he presented me with a engagement ring, and then a year later, we were married.
Fantastic. I love it. Great, great story. So here you have, now I know we talked a little bit on the phone and on Zoom about this, about you can't quite, like, how would you describe them? Were these angelic beings? Were these
They appeared
were
very
these
human.
they're
They
human?
appeared very
Okay.
human.
And so they're like messengers of some type, would you describe them?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so you have this, and how long did this encounter last?
I don't even know.
Okay. So time kind of
I
stops and
really 20 minutes. I'm guessing. We
okay.
could have been there a lot longer than we knew about. I mean, I don't know because, um, yeah, I wasn't. Obviously, I wasn't looking at the time.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
so then of course you get married and everything like that. So now and this again, this is a really important experience that you have. And so I want you to just kind of guide us into what then happens, because you end up at some, not too long. I don't, and give me the time frame here. What got you interested in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and what led you to go in that direction? Because of all the directions you went, I think a lot of people, the last place they would expect you to go would be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I um I just always kind of knew that my beliefs were going in that direction. And I think I knew it since seminary. Um,
Hmm.
we had been asked by one of our professors to take an online quiz to sort of figure out where our beliefs fit in. And interestingly, when I took that quiz, two categories came up. The first category was Mormon. The second category was Jewish.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Um, and so yeah, I just kind of realized that yeah, my beliefs were going in that direction. Now I do believe in Jesus.
Hmm.
So, I want to make that clear. And I had considered converting to Judaism, but that was short-lived.
Okay. So
Um,
just real quick, so when you're in seminary and you take this quiz, how familiar were you with Mormon theology?
I think I had a very skewed understanding of it because, and I know we had talked about this, I believe we talked about this on the phone, because in that independent Baptist school, now you have to
Mhm.
remember we're only like 13 years old. We,
Right?
we don't have any understanding of anything.
Hmm.
But at that school, they showed us the God
The
makers.
God makers, of
The God
course.
makers, yes.
The God, nobody expects the God makers to enter into the conversation like the Spanish Inquisition, but it always does. So, so you get this skewed understanding of Mormonism based on the God makers documentary.
And I will say that as I was watching that, I might not have understood a word they were saying about any of the problems in the church, but my focus was while I was watching that was on the temple and the secrecy behind the temple, and I wondered what really happens there. I really would like to know.
Oh yeah,
And and then I had, through that I had learned about Joseph Smith, and I just found him to be a very interesting, very intriguing character. And
yeah.
so I wanted to learn more about him. And I truly do believe that he um, that that he had the experiences that he said he did.
Hmm.
My faith in Joseph Smith and in the Restoration and in the Book of Mormon as a companion to the Bible is very strong. So yeah, I have a very strong testimony of
Okay,
of all of.
And one of the arguments
all of
I
that.
hear from, anti-Mormons is that they say,
Hmm.
you be aware of, the devil comes as an angel of light, and people like to
Hmm.
talk about, Joseph maybe encountering, maybe something less than, good, but something very dark and
Yeah.
sinister. Did you ever kind of think of that as a possibility as well, just kind of considering our mindsets and backgrounds?
I know he was overcome by something very dark when he went through his mystical experience,
That's
but
true.
then that darkness was overcome by the light
So, yeah.
and by him seeing God and Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
I'll just share with you this experience.
Okay, please do.
My husband and I visited the Sacred Grove. This has been, I'm not sure how many years ago now, but this was something we both wanted to do. And when you go to the Sacred Grove, the missionaries will take you on a tour and, show you the area and the Smith family farm. And I had specifically told them my husband had to go use the restroom. And so while he was in the restroom, I told the missionaries, I said, my husband is Jewish. You probably don't want to mention Jesus. Just to give you a heads up that, let's just not talk about that. And the missionaries looked at me and they said, very wisely, they said, well, we'll just let the Spirit lead. We'll just let I said, fine, that's great. We took the tour. Jesus was not mentioned once. Um, and then my husband tells me, that I'm wanting to go walk around in the sacred grove, and so my husband tells me he has a headache and he wants to go back and check into the hotel. And then as I'm walking to the sacred grove, he calls me and says, "Well, honey, I didn't really have a headache." He said, "All I could feel there was Jesus."
Interesting.
And I was talking with somebody at church about that, and they said, "Well, who do you think was there? Who do you think appeared to Joseph Smith? His presence is still going to be there."
Okay, so now, were you a member of the church at this point when
I
you
was at that point,
you
yes.
were at that point?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I
I
want to
was.
rewind the tape a little bit because I want to talk
Yes.
about, and that's interesting to Sacred Grove experience and your Jewish husband experiencing Jesus at the Sacred Grove, which
Feeling
is
that power
feeling
there.
the power of Jesus. Okay, that's very
Yes.
interesting. That's
Very,
just
yeah.
an interesting data point for people to consider and ponder. I
Yes.
think it's really important.
Hmm.
And so you're having again, you have these sacred experiences. What's interesting, you have a more secular Jewish husband who's also having these mystical experiences. And by the
Yes.
way, he does. There's a chapter in here in which he discusses his experience, and so that's part of this
At
book
the
as well.
very end,
At the
yes.
very end,
Hmm.
um, but I just okay. So you take the test. It looks like you're leaning towards Mormonism as kind of like your theological basis, and so so tell me that trajectory because I think it's really important for people to know the story of what finally led you to become a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well, there had been some other influences too.
Okay.
But I think, one day I just decided, I woke up one Sunday morning and just decided, hey, I think I'm going to go to church. And that was that. And by that point, I just kind of knew, that Mormonism was my faith.
And yeah, so you and it was this a okay, so when you say when you knew that Mormonism was your faith, was this head knowledge or heart knowledge or a little bit of
Heart
both?
knowledge.
Heart knowledge.
And
Okay.
and
How
and and
strong?
head knowledge too, because and this was something very interesting is when you said that, you were pointing out that my beliefs were going in this direction. I love Mormon cosmology.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
can definitely, and you'll see that if you read my book, I can definitely relate to the idea of the Elohim and how all of that works together, the Godhead. And I believe it's much more expansive than we realize.
Yes, yes, I think, and again, I think so. So how are you received into the Latter-day Saint community? Like, what is your how soon?
I would say, I'm definitely a convert.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you're a convert,
And
and
that has its own baggage.
Right. And so,
But I'm also a feminist. And so that, and I think that's very clear in my book as well. But I have tried to scale down the feminism a little bit because I do realize that there needs to be a balance between um, between men and women, and that there is definitely a place for, I mean, obviously there's definitely a place for honoring the priesthood. And so there needs to be that clear balance. But then women at the same time, I feel like don't have full status in a lot of respects. Now, I will say that I do feel equality when I go to the temple.
okay.
That is where I feel complete. It's um, I've never I love the temple. Um, and I do, I do attend the temple. So I try to go as often as I can. Um, but um, but I understand in our church as it is right now, women cannot be ordained to the priesthood, and so that can be a bit of a sensitive issue with me. But at the same time, I'm trying to understand the thinking there.
Okay. Well, I think this is.
It is it's a creative tension.
So I just that leads into the book, okay? Because obviously
Mhm.
you're informed by Mormon cosmology and theology, but also your, a PhD in comparative religion, your knowledge of the Bible and Judaism. And this is really, I think this is probably one of the more unique books that I've encountered since I started this channel. There's a lot of original thought here. It's
Mhm.
and you know your stuff. Like you're not like
Yes.
there are times when I roll my eyes when I'm reading books like, oh my gosh, this person doesn't have a clue. They're taking things out of context. But I learned a lot about Judaism, Christianity, Islam. I
Yes.
mean, this
Mhm.
this story, this book is as much about your, in many ways, it's kind of autobiographical in many
It's
ways.
autobiographical, but it's
Uh,
also theological.
exactly. So I just want
Yes.
you to tell us what made you decide to write this book. But why this title? What is the origin story of this very unique and interesting book?
Well, this book began during the pandemic.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, there was a lot of craziness during that time. We all felt like we were going crazy. Um, and I had just finished my PhD, and also I had just published my first peer review, well, my only peer review article. There's kind of a joke in the academic community about that you write that one peer review article and then just kind of stop there. But I had published my peer review article, and so I was very proud of that. But then the pandemic happened, and life just kind of came to a screeching halt, um, and so I was reading a book that a dear friend of mine, she's kind of like a second mother to me. She had given me this book called, it was about Abraham by Bruce Feiler. And in that book, Feiler had made had made a comment about Mamre being the only place that Abraham actually purchased, the only piece of land that he actually purchased.
Okay. And that's the key thing here.
And so that got me to thinking, what
Mhm.
was it about Mamre? And as I was thinking about that, my mind turned to the mystical experience of the three mysterious visitors, and I thought, there's some interesting parallels that I see there. I couldn't let go of that because my husband and I had had our own mystical encounter with three mysterious visitors, and so I started to make the connections. And I started to make the connections in a way that I never had before. I mean, all of this had kind of been spinning around in my mind, but for me, I need to make connections. I have this kind of compulsive need to see connections. And so, and I had to make those connections for myself. And this book was my attempt to do that.
So I think it's important for you to kind of set the stage as to why Mamre is important. We have three visitors happening.
Hmm.
Just talk about the importance of this origin, really kind of birth. This is where, in many ways, the Abrahamic faiths are birthed out
Yes, the
from.
Abrahamic faiths as yeah, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And to, in addition to that, I would like to add the Samaritan community, which I believe, Jesus did have a lot to say about that. I think he sympathized with their historic, it's a very sad story about how they became marginalized and misunderstood, all because of King Hezekiah's reforms. But that's another story altogether. We're not going to talk too much about that. But yeah, the Samaritan community and also the Druze community. And I, had some interesting revelations there. I guess we can talk about that a little bit too. But yeah, what was it that you, before we get to that, what was it that you were saying, like you were asking
Oh, just the idea.
the,
Okay, so you have these parallels. Okay, so you have both
Mhm.
your mystical experiences that you have that inform
Yeah.
you. You also have your education about theology and religion, comparative religion.
Mhm.
So and you said you found this need to kind of try to find connection.
Yes.
And so that's the key thing is you want to that your book kind of pivots on the idea of Mamre being a very important place. So maybe
Mhm.
describe to the audience why that is.
Well,
So they can,
it's there that the Abrahamic covenant is established, and not that that covenant hadn't been established. I mean, Melchizedek just kind of comes and goes, and I speculate about where he is and where he isn't in the story. I think he's there a lot more than we realize. He's only mentioned once, and then he just kind of disappears. But I think he's present all along. But this mystical encounter with these three visitors, to today, we still don't know who these people really were. Were they angels? Were they divine beings? Were they part of the Elohim? Were they Father, Son, and Holy Ghost? I mean, there's a lot of speculation. Were they Peter, James, and John? That would be a temple reference there. Um, but yeah, I mean, who were they?
right, and that's
And
that.
so yeah, and we still don't know.
Mm, mm.
And scholars are still speculate. I certainly spend some time speculating as to who they might have been.
So
Um,
on page 59 of your book,
yes.
you say one of those other places to look includes Mormonism. Although misunderstood within traditional Christian circles, Mormonism is unique in that one, it is Abrahamic yet Christ-centered. Two, like Mamre, began in a sacred grove with a visitation. And three, offers a uniquely polytheistic interpretive lens through which the sacred reality can be viewed. Uh, Interesting. And so that's where
Yes.
Mormonism comes into this story as well. And it actually
Yes.
doesn't, I think it's at page 59 where you first maybe even mention Mormonism. You bring that into the story. So maybe talk about how your Mormon faith kind of informs this story as well.
Well, I think it opens up the possibility for additional interpretations. Yeah, just and Mormonism does believe in progressive revelation, so I'm always open to that. And that's just part of my liberal theological training speaking. But yeah, and I'm trying to think of where to go with this.
Well, just the idea that you got this idea where really Mormonism kind of begins in a sacred grove. You
Mhm,
have the Mamre thing happening. You've had your own personal experience in a
mhm.
sacred space with individuals. So this is there's this like this pattern that you're
Yeah,
describing.
there's this this
Mhm.
this consistent pattern. And also I like to point out that redemption, life began in the Garden
Garden.
of Eden. Mamre was like a sacred grove experience, and so was the Garden of Gethsemane,
Exactly. Yes, this is the other
where
key
we
thing too. Is
believe
the
that the atonement of Jesus Christ took place.
hmm
And that's the idea of the olive pressing.
Mhm.
where Jesus had to go through that excruciating pain in order to bring about redemption. And so there's kind of this dualistic idea there of redemption begins through suffering. And certainly Joseph Smith went through that as well in his own Sacred Grove experience.
Yeah, that's really
So
fascinating.
there is a continuity there. And I like to look at instances where you see continuity, consistent themes.
So you describe yourself as somewhat of a feminist. I think I used the term, and I could be misquoting you, so correct me if I'm wrong, but was it biblical goddess worship, or have I
Yes, I
used
like to
it?
say that. Yeah,
Yeah.
biblical goddess worship.
So
Yes,
I
I
want to make
said
I
it.
want to be very clear here. What's so interesting talking to you is that you wouldn't necessarily you're more conservative and more orthodox and conservative than people really realize. So when you use
Yes, I
terms like
am.
goddess, heavenly mother, when you're using the term feminist, it don't
Sacred feminine.
sacred
Yes.
feminist. Okay, I like that. Sacred feminist. Don't, just like me, please don't try to put Michelle in a box because she can't. Okay. Let her be her own person, and an individual. I'm very libertarian in that sense. I don't like the idea of people
Mhm.
putting labels on people or trying to force them into a box because that's just unfair to the fact that we are all image bearers and bear a unique signature of who we are, being part
Mhm.
of this, this conversation that we're having with the divine, including you and I having this conversation together, two image bearers having this conversation. So I think it's really important for people to realize that you don't have like some political agenda
No.
that, and I think that's the key thing that poisons a lot of this discourse
Mhm.
is
Yes.
whether it's conservative or liberal politics into the churches is actually poisons the waters. And it can be very dangerous. So I want to be very clear to people in this highly politicized time that we live in which people are disputing against each other and we're fighting each other. Don't put Michelle into a box because she comes up with her own original, unique ideas and integrates them. I think there are progressives that are going to find things in this book that they're going to love. There are going to be conservatives, more orthodox people. They're going to love things in this book within the restoration
Mhm.
context. So I think it's really important that we really don't try to fall into this trap of putting Michelle in a box because that's just not fair to her, to the work that you've done, and to this book. I just wanted to
Thank you.
give that
I
commentary.
appreciate that.
So talk a little bit about this idea of a priesthood that it would also include females, and this idea that you engaged that you really the idea of like goddess worship and all this. I mean, this for a lot of people, this even some Latter-day Saints, this makes them feel very uncomfortable. So maybe kind of guide us through this.
Um, I'm not quite sure where to begin. Can you give me a kind of
Um,
a
okay, so let's begin at Mamre, like
okay.
Melchizedek. Right?
Okay.
Let's talk about that because I think that's important. Your view of Melchizedek and how females play a role even from the beginning of this whole story.
Well, where Melchizedek is concerned, he is a very mysterious figure and he just kind of appears and
Mhm.
then disappears and then, he's not mentioned again until the Psalms and then later it's expounded upon a little bit in Hebrews, but we don't really know much about him. Um, but the Book of Mormon does say that he was the king of Salem, which is, modern day is Jerusalem, a reference to Jerusalem. Um, but it doesn't really say, we can assume, if he was a king, then he was probably married, right? I mean, but again, nothing is mentioned about that. And so from there, and my book does go into some speculative territory where that is concerned. And I deal with that in a very interesting, unique sort of way. Um, but there's not much said about that. And then the question of Sarah and where she fits into the story. And
Yeah.
when the visitors appeared, they spoke to Abraham. Sarah
Mhm.
overheard the conversation, but um, in some ways she wasn't fully privy to. Well, they did tell her something very important, but she, she's asked to go and just kind of go into the tent and just knead some bread, get the meal ready. Um, for the visitors, which was, connected with the hospitality codes at the time. But there is some, I think there in that story, there's definitely some hidden goddess imagery. And the tent itself, Mamre itself is, I mean, that was a sacred shrine, and it may have been, I do speculate in my book that it may have been connected with her home, her lineage. Again, this gets into some speculative territory, but there, there may have been some hidden goddess connections there.
Okay.
Um, and
Yeah.
so that, not that it's blatantly stated, but it opens the door for some possibilities to discuss, to
Yes.
consider.
And I think again that's why people need to read the book because it does get into a lot of, I think you make a lot of interesting connections. And I kind of wanted to talk
Hmm.
a little bit too, because one of the things that you said was the divine counsel is Mormonism 101. And
Yes.
tie this in with
And
following
and the evangelical world has picked up on that because of Michael Heiser.
Michael Heiser, exactly. So on page
Yes.
110, you bring in Michael Heiser's work about the unseen realm and the divine
Hmm.
counsel is Mormonism 101. Talk about why this is also important and plays a role here.
Because it's opening the evangelical world to the possibility that the idea of Elohim is a lot more expansive than we realize.
Mm, mm,
And if you begin to talk about, well, what does it mean that we're image bearers of God? What does that mean for a woman?
mhm,
Um, we're created in God's image, male and female.
mhm,
Um, yeah. And that one just kind of makes you stop and go, there's something there that's not not being fully explained.
mhm. Yeah. So, and that's
Um,
what's so interesting to me is this idea in Heiser. And I'll tell you, I had lunch with Dan McClellan a couple years ago at Sunstone, and I brought up Michael Heiser, and he was at nothing but high praise for his work.
mhm.
So I think that and he's had an impact in this idea because again, and then as I've studied further into Mormonism, but also just biblical literature and scholarship, I recognize that yeah, the reality is that there was a time and a place in which the Jews believed in multiple gods, believed that
Yes.
Elohim and Yahweh
And
were
I've
part of a divine
speculated too.
council. What's
Yes,
that?
I've speculated too that it may have been that God was calling Abraham to accept a new pantheon that he had never heard of before. Coming out of his Sumerian, he was from Ur of Chaldea. He was Sumerian. And then there's some speculation that his wife, Sarah, may have had Canaanite origins, maybe through her mother. We don't really know. Again, a lot of that's speculative, but but they, but they're being called out to follow this unknown God, or I would go as far to say this unknown pantheon of gods, this unknown divine family,
Mm,
divine council, the divine council worldview that Michael Heiser talks about. So, and when we say that, um, when we say that, that you're to worship God only, are we really talking about strict monotheism,
mm,
as in just one male God sitting on a throne somewhere in heaven? Or is this like more of a divine council or a heavenly family, a
mhm.
family of gods? Did Abraham, was he being introduced to his own pantheon?
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and I think that there's something there that I think you're keying in
Hmm.
on that I think people need to further
Yeah.
explore. and not be afraid to explore these things because I
And
think
and then there are different names for God in the Bible. What do you do with those?
right, why all those names,
El
right?
Shaddai, El Elyon,
Hmm. Hmm. Correct.
Lord Sabaoth.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah, I mean there's a lot going on in our scriptures that we don't have the entire context, the cultural context of what's going
Hmm.
on, how the people would have initially received these ideas back in the day versus how we're viewing it through a traditional, let's say, historic Christian view of a
Hmm.
Trinitarian view, a very creedal view of Christianity, that kind of uh, whitewashes and sanitizes, you could say, some of this stuff and makes it a little more
Yes.
palatable. I think we have to acknowledge that. And again, I don't want people to start calling me a heretic or anything like that, but I do think it's important that we have these types of conversations. And I wanted to key in on another thing. And what's so interesting too, and I want people to understand, Michelle has a great deep knowledge of so many of these religious traditions, and including she brings her evangelical background into this uh, as well. Like you're viewing it from that perspective, and also relying on, like the Bruce Feiler's work with Abraham, Michael Heiser's work. Another one that I think is really important that people don't realize that E.W. Bollinger's work on astrology, the stars, and that's published by Erdsman's, which is one of the leading evangelical publishing houses. And I may have missed. Michelle might be dropping off here, so let's hopefully this will get fixed here real quick. Maybe she might have to drop off. But either way, so we'll hopefully get this fixed and this won't be a problem. She might have to jump off briefly here, which is too bad because I hope to release this today. I hope not to have to do any edits. So we'll just kind of hope and pray that she gets on here pretty soon. And so while we're waiting for Michelle to come back on, as a matter of fact, I'm just going to hit pause here real quick. So Michelle's back, and we had a little technical issue there. But one of the things I was keying in on was the work that you rely on, the work of other evangelicals, and you come and then you bring that knowledge to the table, including E.W. Bollinger's
Hmm.
work about astrology, about the signs in the sky, about how they would influence. And you wrote quite a bit about this in the book. So I just wanted to touch about
Yes.
on that. And keeping in mind, this is published by Erdsman's, one of the leading evangelical publishers that's still in existence to this day. And maybe talk a little bit about why you felt it was important to talk about like using astrology or signs in the skies to help inform this story.
Because Abraham was told to look to the stars for answers.
Mm,
And, we often forget that. And he was even told that his descendants would be as the stars in the heavens. And so maybe there's a story there that in the stars that we've completely overlooked. Maybe there's some answers that need to be found there. To try to make sense of the some of the craziness in our world. And so I think that astrology, as we know, is given a bad rap because it's considered pagan. It's considered, within the evangelical worldview, especially, it's considered evil. Um, but it's important to remember that the Hebrews, I mean, astrology is a very ancient science. And the Hebrews, I think, had their own understanding of astrology that fit in with their worldview, with their pantheon, and reflected a kind of an overarching story. And it's not that they could just look to the heavens and say, well, what's my future or what's going to happen this week? It didn't work that way. This was more of kind of an expansive view, telling the story of time itself, of God's plan of redemption. Um, and so looking to the heavens for answers regarding that is certainly not condemned by Scripture. And so and as I was beginning to ask these questions and see these connections and beginning to research this for myself, I began to see connections right away. I seem to be very good at that. picking up on various things that others wouldn't necessarily see. And so as I was beginning to look at this, I discovered the writings of Bullinger and realized that, maybe he's onto something here. And this, this is kind of an older, an older writing, but I think that this is something that maybe we don't really have a lot of information on this.
Yeah,
It was
and
very defined. Um, I felt like a lot of my research was very scattered because there's just not a lot of information out there
well,
on
and
this
again,
topic.
this is the key thing is I grew up with Bollingers, but I want to make it very clear to any of my evangelical naysayers out there, they're trying to make it out that I'm not a legitimate evangelical or I don't know what I'm talking about. Again, Bollinger was a Presbyterian minister, wrote
Hmm.
this book about astrology, published by Erdsman's. I grew up with these books. My grandparents had these books, and D. James Kennedy out of Coral Ridge Ministries. Growing up, he promoted these books. So I want to make it very clear that this is part of
Hmm.
the evangelical story too, and that we don't want to separate it because again, so often people try to go after Joseph Smith for practicing these things like astrology and divination and all these kind of
Yeah.
things. And the reality is that there's this pattern of evangelicals following these very same things that we kind of want to hide as well. So I think we need to recognize that there's a lot more magic, if you will, going on than in our world as well. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, that is a fair thing to say. Hmm.
I love
Yeah.
it. So
It's a magical worldview.
it is in many ways. I just want to say that you cover so much in this book, and in one interview probably doesn't even. I mean, we could literally do multiple interviews on so much about this book. I and there's so many things that a couple things like the Rosary is thoroughly Mormon. What's that all about? There's two priesthoods,
Oh, wow.
heavenly priesthood and its earthly manifestations. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement to make.
There's a
Uh,
lot of bold statements in my book.
there's a lot of food for thought here. And one of the things that's so fascinating to me is just this idea of the Druze. Now, here is this, you could almost call it a mystery religion, right?
Yes, it is.
And it's very hidden. And apparently their lineage comes through Jethro. And can I make this statement that I think is a little provocative? It's on page 120. But the Druze represent an unbroken succession of priestly power. Whoa. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Um, okay. Where to begin there? Um, well, wow. Okay. Now I'm not even sure where to go with this. I knew what I was going to say earlier, and now I'm kind of
Well,
stumped.
it's just really interesting, of course, because we have this idea of priesthood and how you understand it through Melchizedek, but also where priesthood lineage comes from, how you might have this group that kind of kept to itself. And
Okay.
we're not trying to necessarily convert people, but just trying to keep this tradition through Jethro, maybe hidden from all of us. And then but it's still there in practice. So I find that a fascinating statement that
Well,
you're making.
there,
Of course, now we understand the Catholic sense of priesthood, what the Mormon sense of priesthood is. And of course, the Protestant view that the priesthood of all believers. So priesthood plays an important part of this book, and I think this
yeah.
intriguing idea about the Druze having their own priestly lineage is just outright fascinating to me.
Yeah. And so there is there's a verse in the Mormon scriptures, Doctrine and Covenants, that says that the priesthood was continued through Jethro, who passed it down. And you have to remember he was the high priest of Midian at the time, after after Moses fled after he fled Egypt, and then he went into the desert of Midian, and there he discovered her, he rediscovered, if you will, the traditions of his ancestors, and it was through Jethro's influence. Well, So it was the high priest Jethro that passed the priest, or that transferred the priesthood to Moses, who was of Levitical lineage, and then from there, to Aaron and to his descendants. So they were all in that same lineage. But this was, and Moses had married into the priestly lineage of Midian. So there's a lot going on there. Um, but what I discovered, and this was an interesting revelation for me, was I took a DNA test, and I probably don't look Middle Eastern. I'm more Norwegian than anything, I think. But I took a DNA test and discovered that I had Druze ancestry, and it's very minuscule, but it's there.
Hmm.
So that got me to researching that side of myself a little bit more. Um, and then I took into account what it said in Doctrine and Covenants about the priesthood being passed from Jethro on to Moses, on to, so on and so forth. Um, um, and through my studies of the Druze, I realized that they claim Jethro as one of their prophets, one of
Hmm.
their main prophets, and there may even be some shared lineage there.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and it's my belief that they may even be descendants of the original Midianites.
Wow. That's fascinating to
So,
me. I love this.
so that's where I get this idea that there is still this unbroken succession of priesthood
I love it.
among the Druze community.
One
I
of our
hope I
conversations.
explained that well.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's really interesting. Again, of course, people can check out the book. It's really
yeah.
laid out very
Hmm.
well there too. But you described this work as being both mystical and academic. And I think
Hmm.
that's a great way to look at it. I want to wrap this up, but I just want you to kind of talk about why people should get this book, especially if you're a Latter-day Saint or you're just a student of religion. And also if there's anything that I didn't get a chance to cover that's in this book that you'd like to also bring up to the audience, this would be an opportunity to do so as well.
Well, I think that just to, as you mentioned, my book is um, a healthy combination of both academic research, it's thoroughly researched, and also mystical experiences. And I think that, and it's that combination of not only scripture, and I do think my book does try to be, it focuses on scripture. I try to keep it Abrahamic. I like to say that. Um, but I think that, I think that I'm sorry.
It's okay. Um, I think what's so interesting is that, and really what I loved about this when you said that it was Abrahamic, is
Hmm.
not only are you quoting from the Bible and the Jewish scriptures, but you're also
Yes.
one thing I think that surprised me, this surprised me, was also using the Quran. And I
Yes.
just thought it was really, I loved how you did that because
Hmm.
it does, for me, it makes sense that there would be these oral traditions within the Arab community that would make their
Hmm.
way into the Quran and and then kind of give their perspective. I felt that that was really, I wouldn't have expected that, but I really felt it really helped inform the book as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love
Yeah.
it. Well, I wanted to say,
Mhm.
Michelle, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the program today. Again,
Yeah.
the name
Thank
of
you
the
for
book
having
is
me.
Return to Mamre, Recovering the Melchizedek Mysteries Beneath the Sacred Groves. Now, I'll have links in the description for those of you who would like to purchase this book. Christmas is coming, so if you're looking for a last minute stocking stuffer for your scriptorium members of your family who love books and love theology and love these kind of things, this would be a perfect gift for them this holiday season. Michelle, greatly appreciate you coming on. I think you're a wonderful person who just brings a lot to the table. I think this
Thank
book
you.
was one of the more thought-provoking books that I've ever engaged. Very well written, very well researched. And like again, I love original thinkers, radical original thinkers such as yourself is. I want to honor you for the great work that you did.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, we'll have links in the description to everything we talked about, including links so that you can purchase this book. Also, for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, we'll have links in there as well. But remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.